The early 2000s were an incredibly weird time for beer, especially craft beer. The craft beer movement was really growing into what would eventually become known as the craft beer boom of the early 2010s. During this time period, we saw exponential growth. We saw huge innovation in techniques. We saw the revival of styles. We saw experimentation that had never been done in the history of beer, let alone here in America, where we were very homogenized and very sterile. Things were good, but competition was incredibly fierce. In order to stand out from the crowd, breweries had to do something special, something unique, and oftentimes that came with interesting ingredients or just being downright weird. But one little subcategory created one of the most interesting chapters in craft beer history. And that's why today we're going to be talking about craft beer's ABV war. Let me set the scene a little bit for you. For so long, American drinkers have been subjugated to low ABV beers. And although nowadays we have a lot of trendy session IPAs and light craft beers, that wasn't always the case. At this point in time in the early 2000s, people were just now experimenting and experiencing for the first time beers that are ranging 6 to 10% ABV. We're talking imperial stouts, double IPAs. It was a whole new world. And beer drinkers were going way out of their way to get their hands on these stronger beers. And they would drink them and check them off and brag to their friends, look at this huge, strong beer I drink. I drank an 8% IPA. That was huge at that time. There was nothing else like that before. One of the first big players in this big beer movement was Samuel Adams. In 1994, they released the first ever triple bock, brewed with maple syrup, coming in at 17.5% ABV. It's huge. Now, of course, this was not the norm. Most beers at this time were closer to 4% than they were 10%. So these massive double-digit beers, these high-teen ABV beers, they were almost mythical in their exclusivity and their rarity. But similar to the space race seen by the Soviets in the US in the 60s, this chapter of beer, starting with that triple bock, set the stage for breweries trying to one-up each other and brew the strongest beers that they could possibly brew. So from what I can tell, the actual start of the ABV race began in 1999 with Samuel Adams when they released the Millennium Ale in celebration of the dawning of the new century. It was New Year's Eve. They released this big, whopping 20% ABV beer. It is the first beer, from all the research I was able to tell, to reach the 20% mark. Other breweries from around the country started experimenting with how strong can we make it? How strong can we make it? How can we raise the ABV? How can we have better efficiency mashing? How can we improve our fermentation techniques? And we saw a lot of great beers coming out of them, like Dogfish Head 120, and the overall standard ABV kind of rose to about the 7-8%, with a whole lot more beers than that 12 to 13% becoming much more commonplace. So with this huge shift in beer perception, Samuel Adams knew that they had to do something again to help them stand out, to help them be unique, to really solidify the fact that they deserve to be sitting on that throne. And that's when they released their paragon, their shining achievement. They released Samuel Adams Utopias.
We've now reached the lunatic fringe of brewing. We've reached Samuel Adams Utopias. This is a unique beer. There is literally nothing like it in the world. It is, among other things, the strongest naturally fermented beer ever made. It comes from these barrels. Some of it is aged now 16 years, dating back to the original barrels of triple bock. And that gives Utopias an extraordinary complexity, extraordinary aromatics, and of course bring the high alcohol level that is unique to Utopias.
Utopias was unlike anything that had ever been seen before in beer. It was closer to a brandy, closer to a liquor than it was a beer for most people's taste. Batch 1 of Samuel Adams Utopias hit the 24% mark, and it just blew people's minds. Never had they seen such an expensive beer, such a uniquely styled packaging for a product, and of course such a strong beer. It completely revolutionized people's opinion on beer. And because of this, Samuel Adams proudly boasted, not only was it the most expensive beer, not only was it the most groundbreaking and revolutionary beer, but it was the strongest beer in the world. The problem is, most breweries didn't see it as a declaration. They saw it more of a challenge. Years passed with Samuel Adams sitting on the throne, only growing stronger. The second batch upped the ante, getting up to 27% ABV, just shy of 30. But across the globe, a challenger had risen. In a small town outside of Nuremberg in Germany, there was the Schwarzbrau Brewery, and they released a worthy contender for Samuel Adams. They released the Schwarzbrau Schwarzbach. Now, the standard Schwarzbrau Schwarzbach right here, it comes in at a standard 13% ABV. Schwarzbrau's whole thing is that they like to brew big, strong, in-your-face beers. But this new version of Schwarzbrau Schwarzbach was unprecedented. It came in at 32% ABV. And the crazy thing about it is it completely adhered to the Bavarian purity law, where Samuel Adams' Utopias and Millennium and Dogfish Head 120, and they use a lot of alternative sugars like maple and corn sugar. These beers were 100% grain, maltose, straight out of the mash tun, high efficiency malt, high precision during fermentation. But they did have a little trick up their sleeve. Adhering to the Bavarian purity law includes Eisbock, and Eisbock is a traditional beer style with an incredibly interesting and unique story. But that's for another video. But the process is simple. They brew a really strong Doppelbock, they then freeze it. They remove all the frozen water, leaving behind a sugary beer concentrate of basically alcohol and flavor. Unfortunately, the success of the small Schwarzbrau brewery was very short-lived. Only 9 months after the release of the huge Schwarzbrau Schwarzbach, we saw Brewdog release a Tactical Nuclear Penguin Imperial Stout.
Tactical Nuclear Penguin is our audacious attempt to make the world's strongest ever beer.
Using a revolutionary and completely untested technique, we're going to be taking this beer down to minus 20 degrees Celsius.
That is penguin temperatures.
As you can see over there, we've got the Tactical Nuclear Penguin and it's chilling down nicely. The alcohol freezes at a lower temperature than the water does, so that way we can remove some of the water from the solution and get the alcohol content going higher. There's quite a nice flow coming down and it's tasting good.
And finally, after a year and a half in casks, 21 days in the freezer at minus 20 degrees, we've got the finished article, Tactical Nuclear Penguin. This beer is mental. This is the biggest beer ever made by a human or a penguin ever.
The fact that we aged this for a year and a half before we started just means...
Tactical Nuclear Penguin really took off. Even though this was the first one, to really try to reach for the crown, it didn't have the same marketing prowess that Brewdog's Tactical Nuclear Penguin did. It did not sit well with Schwarzbrau. Schwarzbrau was very proud of their accomplishment, and they really didn't like the fact that it was taken away from them so suddenly. They knew that there was only one thing that they could do, and that was to brew a bigger, stronger, higher ABV beer. And that's exactly what they did. Only 1 month after the release of Tactical Nuclear Penguin, Schwarzbrau came out with a new version of their Schwarzbrau Schwarzbach. This time, upping the ante in a huge way. They refined their ice distillation process to make it more efficient. They refined their entire brewing process to make the standard beer higher in ABV before the ice distillation. And because of these techniques and because of this process, they were able to up it up by 9%, coming in at a solid 40% ABV. And once again, the Germans wore the crown for the highest ABV beer on the planet. Now, I don't know if Brewdog saw this as a personal attack or if they just saw it as a good opportunity for some friendly competition. But they decided that, you know what? We're going to fight for this. We're going to take back our title that we took from you. In February of 2010, Brewdog released their next behemoth ABV beer, an Imperial IPA coming in at 41% ABV, known as Sink the Bismarck. Now, this was a little bit insulting because the Bismarck was a German Nazi ship that was sunk off the coast of the UK back during World War II. An obvious jab to Schwarzbrau's German heritage. To add insult to injury, it only came in at 1% higher than Schwarzbrau's last iteration of the Schwarzbrau Schwarzbach. But Brewdog had a secret plan in the works. They knew that Schwarzbrau was going to retaliate. They knew that they were going to come out with a stronger version of their Eisbock. Like any good war, it has to be played like a game of chess. You got to predict your opponent's moves and stay 2 steps ahead of them. So they put a little plan into motion that would be unveiled about 9 months later. According to plan and right on schedule, Schwarzbrau released a new Schwarzbock coming in at 43% ABV. But they unfortunately fell directly into Brewdog's trap because they had in the works the biggest beer to ever be released, but it was also the strangest beer probably ever. They brewed a 55% Belgian blonde strong ale that was an absolute behemoth. But to kind of bury Schwarzbrau, they stuffed the bottle in the throats of road-killed animals. This beer was known as the end of history.
Fukuyama defined Western democracy as the end point in the evolution of politics. This is the end point in the evolution of beer, the end of history, the death of beer.
The death of a stout.
No, the stout was dead. Natural causes.
Germans.
And it seemed that the end of history was kind of appropriately named. They didn't think that Schwarzbrau could ever compete with them. And to be honest, the Schwarzbrauerei founder even said to himself that it was an extreme challenge. So he went back to the drawing board and he really had to fine-tune everything. But he was able to pump out a 57% version of his Eisbock. Unfortunately, it failed to get the headlines. It failed to get the media attention. I think that after almost a decade of this fighting back and forth between all these breweries, I think the media grew tired of the whole ABV arms race. So it was mostly overlooked, and that's a bit unfortunate. And it seemed that that was the last shot in this war. Schwarzbrau said that they don't think that they could brew anything any stronger without breaking the limits of the Bavarian purity law, and that just wasn't something they were willing to do. At the same time, Brewdog said that they were just tired and they didn't want to continue on testing and pushing innovative but traditional brewing techniques. It seemed that the war was over, it seemed that they had a beautiful ceasefire, and it seemed that Schwarzbrau would remain the king. But it was such an exciting time. I don't think I've ever seen any two breweries compete at such a level that they were able to completely push the gambit of what beer is. They changed what its perception is. They changed what it could be. You know, most people consider these beers closer to liquor than they do beer, but they're beer, you know, it's pure beer. It's just what it is. These two breweries, through this, I don't know if it's a friendly conflict, but through this conflict was able to change the definition of beer. And that's incredibly awesome. They proved that with enough dedication, resources, and most importantly, skill, beer could almost be anything you want it to be. The natural conclusion of the ABV arms race had reached its conclusion. I have to emphasize the natural part of that because the story's not over yet. It continues. As is often the case with any conflict, any battle, any war, any skirmish, when one enemy falls to the wayside, it's only a matter of time before someone steps up and takes their place. And that's exactly what happened here. Before the dust could even settle between the German-Scottish conflict, new challengers arose. Out of Belgium, we had the Coalship Brewery, who released a magnificently strong 60% ABV beer. But wanting to bring the crown back to Scotland, Braumeister released a almost incomprehensibly strong 65% beer known as the Armageddon Ale. This new round of competition just really didn't capture the magic and the innovation of the previous chapter. To make things worse, Braumeister was found to have been putting pure ethanol inside of their beers to reach their high ABV limits. This scandal caused a whole lot of condemnation and backlash against the brewery all throughout the community. What these dudes had done beforehand was all natural. It was brewing at its finest, and it felt like these people just kind of took a shortcut and really underhandedly and deceptively obfuscated the whole concept. That did not stop Braumeister in any way because only like a year or two later they released Snake Venom, which was a 67.5% ABV beer. But this time on the label, it clearly stated that it was a fortified beer, reinforced with pure ethanol. It kind of entered into a new realm of competition in the fortified beer market, because shortly after that, Coolship in Belgium once again released a 70% beer, except that one was fortified with pure whiskey. And although I do believe that this back and forth fortified market will continue on forever, I just don't think it's the same. And for me, that's why it concluded one of the most interesting and weird moments in beer history. I absolutely love this story. One, because I was alive and old enough to drink during it, so I was able to experience a lot of these beers at the time when they were coming out. It was a huge hunt for them all, and it was just so damn exciting to be alive during that time. But I also am just so amazed at these brewers' ability to push the envelope to the absolute max. In my mind, Schwarzbrau is and probably forever will be the reigning champion. I don't count Braumeister and Coolship because they're a bunch of phonies. However, there is another part of me that really does kind of want this competition to continue. As Schwarzbrau is well aware, there is always a bigger fish and there is always somebody willing to step up to the plate to challenge it. So in a small way, I want some scrappy upstart brewery to find some innovative techniques, some method that will allow them to stay pure and true to beer brewing format and skill while still pushing that envelope. And maybe we'll see a new crowned champion here sometime, and hopefully it'll start a new round of the craft beer ABV wars. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all the support I've been seeing here lately. A lot of new subscribers. I cannot thank y'all enough. I really hope y'all like this story. It is one of the most interesting ones to me, and I just loved it. And I'm so happy I'm able to sit down, talk about it, and drink some of these beers, and that people are interested to hear about it. Like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there is a story in every bottle, and that life is brewtiful. Cheers.